Ever get that feeling like you're navigating a maze where someone else designed the walls and wrote all the rules?
Uh-huh.
Maybe it's in the legal world, maybe financial structures. That sense there's this whole system operating that, well, you don't fully grasp, and you're not sure how much control you really have.
Yeah, that feeling of being, inside a system that feels bigger and maybe not totally transparent. I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Well, today we're plunging into a framework that suggests a different way to understand and maybe interact with those systems, particularly for a specific audience.
Okay.
It's called Syntactical Trust Administration. And our main source for this deep dive is an article by Noble Gemone Newton L.
Right, Syntactical Trust Administration. And the article presents it as a very specific method, doesn't it? Intended for Muurs and Indigenous Heirs and Autochthonous Peoples.
Exactly.
The author argues it offers them sort of a pathway to administer their own affairs outside conventional statutory control. He really stresses how important this is for them.
Absolutely. And the author's background itself is, well, pretty intriguing. He's listed as a civil law notary, trust administrator, parliamentary draftsman.
And affiliated with Rex Scripta Equity Partners and the Golden Quill Sesh per Onc.
But what really jumps out, what piques the curiosity, is how he says his understanding came about. Not just traditional legal school.
Right, he mentions ancestral recall.
Yeah, and study with Dr. Bay and the Diversity Trust Guardian. It makes you wonder, what are the foundations of this approach? It's not the usual path.
No, it certainly suggests a perspective drawing from, let's say, sources beyond mainstream legal doctrine, maybe bringing in heritage, specific cultural understandings as like foundational elements.
Now, before we really get into the weeds, there's a crucial point the author makes right at the start. He says, syntactical trusts are not grammar-based, they are governance-based.
Okay, that's important.
He really emphasizes it's about positioning, not punctuation. So if you were thinking this might be about clever wordplay or, I don't know, semantic tricks.
He's heading that off.
Exactly. He's clear as presented as a structured system, an order rooted in law.
That clarification is definitely key. So syntactical here means like structured, systematic, like the framework itself, not playing with words.
Seems like it.
Suggests a system with its own internal logic, its own way of operating.
Okay, so let's try to unpack the core of this. Syntactical Trust Administration is described as a precise, private, jurisdictional system.
Precise, private, jurisdictional.
For managing trusts that are layered,
Right.
based on their specific purpose, their classification, and what the author calls the correct standing of the people involved.
Private and jurisdictional immediately jump out there, suggest something different from the public, statutory legal systems most of us know, right?
Right.
And that phrase, correct standing, it hints at maybe a specific understanding of legal identity or rights within this particular framework, maybe different from the usual definitions.
And this isn't just theory for the author. He talks about a personal shift after applying this, moving away from seeing trusts as just, static legal documents,
Okay.
to actually administering them as what he calls living jurisdictions.
Living jurisdictions. That's a powerful way to put it. It implies these aren't just passive things holding assets, but like active dynamic systems.
Yeah,
With their own rules, their own goals, their own internal governance.
exactly. He also mentions realigning his contracts, his credentials, under this private governance, aiming to restore what he terms original status and rely less on public institutions. That sounds like a really fundamental change in how someone sees their relationship with the established legal system.
It really does. It sounds like a move towards a kind of self-governance, maybe, within a privately set up legal framework, rather than just working inside the public law system. Raises interesting questions about, well, how recognized are these private systems?
Then there's the practical side. He talks about taking traditional paper filings and turning them into what he calls jurisdictionally sound instruments.
How does he say that happens?
Through specific processes, like sealing, witnessing, notarizing them, making sure they're built correctly under trust law. But maybe distinct from what he refers to as corporate fiction.
Okay, the emphasis on those specific steps, the paperwork. It shows a focus on actually doing this, right? Implementing the framework. And when he says corporate fiction, it sounds like he might see government systems as operating under a kind of, well, artificial legal construct
Maybe.
as opposed to something more fundamental like natural law. And that difference probably shapes why he has these specific requirements for creating those jurisdictionally sound instruments.
And a really key part of this, he stresses, is teaching family members about their roles.
Right.
Beneficiary, protector, trustee.
Right.
The goal being responsible management and, his words, avoiding entanglement with foreign authorities.
That focus on education, it really highlights that this isn't just about setting up legal structures, it's about making sure everyone involved understands them deeply.
With the long term.
Yeah, for effectiveness and protection. And that concern about foreign authorities, it likely reflects a belief that maybe the existing systems don't properly protect the specific rights and interests of Autochthonous peoples.
It sounds like it goes way beyond just legal and financial stuff, though. The author calls this transformation spiritual, commercial, and generational.
Wow, okay.
It suggests a really holistic shift in how you operate in the world. He also mentions managing things like wealth, protection, identity, purpose, through what he calls functionally integrated trust offices.
Instead of separate tools.
Exactly. A more unified approach rather than dealing with things piece by piece.
That multifaceted nature is a really significant point. It suggests Syntactical Trust Administration aims to tackle not just legal or money matters, but broader things. Identity, heritage, the future for the next generations, and this idea of functionally integrated trust offices. It speaks to wanting a really comprehensive, coordinated way to manage all those different parts of life.
He also briefly mentions something called the 15 trust model. Says it's the underlying framework for this whole network of trusts.
The 15 trust model.
Yeah, he emphasizes it's executable, scalable, and private. He doesn't really detail the model itself in this article, but it seems to be the structural backbone of the whole system. The existence of a specific model like that, it raises questions, doesn't it, about how complex it is, how easy it is for the intended audience to actually implement and manage something potentially that intricate. Is having that level of detail a strength, like a clear roadmap? Or could it be a barrier?
That's a fair point. Mentioning specific model definitely adds a layer of defined structure. Calling it executable, scalable, and private suggests they're thinking about practical use, adaptability, growth, privacy.
Right.
But yeah, without more details, it's hard to judge the practical side of managing such a multi-layered system.
Okay, now let's really get into the why. Why does the author believe this knowledge is so absolutely critical for Autochthonous Peoples, Muurs, and Indigenous Heirs?
What's the core argument?
His central point seems to be that if you want to reclaim, protect, and govern, you have to restructure, you have to classify, you have to form under law, specifically under this framework of Syntactical Trust Administration.
That speaks directly to self-determination, doesn't it? Agency. The author seems to be saying that for these groups to have real control over their affairs, protect their rights, their interests, they need to set up their own legal and administrative frameworks, maybe outside systems they feel aren't serving them well.
He then makes a pretty bold statement. He suggests that most families are already existing within trust relationships they didn't actually create or fully understand.
Really? Like what?
He cites things like birth certificate trusts, implied commercial contracts, and unilateral estate claims by foreign parties as examples.
Wow, that's a significant claim. He seems to be suggesting the current legal and economic system automatically places people, especially these specific groups, into pre-existing trust structures, often without them even knowing or agreeing.
Seems to be the implication.
That raises some fundamental questions about what those implied relationships really are and what their consequences might be legally and practically.
And Syntactical Trust Administration, according to the article, is meant to fix this.
Yeah.
By repositioning families within their own estate jurisdiction, freeing them from this perceived misclassification and external control. It's pitched as a way to basically take back control over their legal and administrative standing.
So essentially he's proposing a shift from potentially being like passive beneficiaries in systems set up by others to becoming active administrators within their own self-defined jurisdictional setup. It implies a move towards much greater autonomy, self-governance in legal and administrative stuff.
The article then lists some key features these syntactical trusts supposedly offer. Things like classification of the trust's purpose and function, protection through private law administration, integration with ecclesiastical, indigenous, and trade jurisdictions, and correct formation under autochthonous, natural, and contractual law. It sounds like it's meant to be pretty comprehensive, interconnected.
That mention of integrating with ecclesiastical, indigenous, and trade jurisdictions is interesting. How would those different systems actually work together within this syntactical trust idea?
Good question.
These features definitely highlight the intended scope, the potential benefits. Classifying purpose and function suggests a structured way to plan estates. Protection via private law administration points to that desire to operate outside public statutory law.
Right.
And integrating with different kinds of jurisdictions. It sounds like an attempt to create a system that's legally sound in its own private context, but also lines up with other relevant ways of governing other community structures. The specifics of how that integration works, that would likely be in the details of that 15 trust model, I suppose.
And just to maybe head off any skepticism, the author repeats that this is not about UCC gimmickry or notary pageantry.
Okay.
He calls it structured, layered executive estate governance. He's really trying to stress the serious, substantive nature of this approach.
Yeah, that's an important clarification. Trying to establish credibility, right, and distinguish it from other approaches people might see as less legitimate or less legally sound. Those words, structured, layered, executive, they're meant to convey sophistication, practical application in governing estates.
There's almost an implied call to action, too, when he warns, if we do not govern our estates, others will. If we do not speak in the language of administration, they will assume authority. That's powerful. Underscores the importance he sees in actively engaging with these systems.
That statement really gets across the author's sense of urgency and the potential downsides of not taking proactive steps to understand and manage your own affairs legally and administratively. He's framing it not just as an option, but maybe as a necessary action for self-preservation, empowerment.
And the ultimate goal, as he presents it, is reclaiming jurisdiction, structure, and lawful presence. It goes beyond just getting back land or wealth. It's about establishing a legitimate, recognized standing within a legal and governance framework they've created themselves.
That broader vision, jurisdiction, structure, and lawful presence, shows his aims go beyond just asset protection. It hits on more fundamental issues of sovereignty, self-determination within a legal context.
He's also very clear this isn't just abstract theory. For him, syntactical trusts are about being in position.
In position?
Yeah, having the lawful contracts, the layered trusteeship, the effective estate management all set up. It's about practical application, having the right framework actually in place.
That emphasis on being in position reinforces the practical, action-oriented side of this. It's not just about having the right ideas, but about actively structuring your affairs in a legally sound, effective way based on these principles.
Finally, he shares his own family's experience. Talks about the clarity, the protection, the generational model that's provided them. He even identifies himself as a living trust administrator over a lineal estate, which sounds like a direct application of everything he's advocating for.
That personal testimony, yeah, it adds a significant layer of conviction to what he's saying. Sharing his own experience gives weight to the idea that this framework isn't just theoretical, but it has real benefits and can be put into practice successfly.
And he wraps up with what really feels like an invitation. Suggests that people reading the article are likely called to the same work, and that the path forward, while maybe unlearned by the masses, has been preserved by the scribes. He gives contact info for anyone interested in learning more, building their estate. There's an email, a phone number, a website.
Scribes at rexscriptaequitypartners.com, +1 888-991-9REX, and rexscriptaequitypartners.com.
Right. And he mentions their alliance again with the Diversity Trust Guardian and Dr. Bay, and that they submitted this to Banking in the Box magazine.
So that direct invitation, the contact details, it shows the author is actively trying to engage with and teach others who might want to explore this framework. And mentioning the magazine submission suggests an effort to get these ideas out to a wider, potentially relevant audience.
Okay, so to try and sum up, Syntactical Trust Administration, as Noble Gemone Newton presents it, is this framework, centered on a specific multi-layered trust structure.
Right.
Intended to help Muurs, Indigenous Heirs, and Autochthonous Peoples reclaim their lineage and govern their own estates.
And it's presented as a potential way for these groups to operate within their own jurisdiction, maybe, offering an alternative to the standard statutory control.
For me, the big takeaways are that idea of trusts as dynamic, living jurisdictions, not just dead paper. The importance placed on establishing private governance over your affairs, and that call to actively administer your own estate, rather than maybe unknowingly operating within structures someone else created.
That's a good summary, and it does leave us with a really provocative thought, doesn't it? If the author's right that many people are unknowingly operating within trust structures set up by others, what are the implications of consciously, deliberately creating your own framework for governance for a state administration?
Yeah. What possibilities open up?
What might emerge from really understanding and using the language of administration, as he puts it? It definitely encourages you, the listener, to think about your own relationship with legal and governance structures and whether these concepts resonate with how you see things or what you aspire to.